we're going to continue to explore CGC census data. The books that have been most submitted to CGC by year. We're creeping through the Platinum Age, and we're going to look at 1936, when the seeds of what became the golden age of comic book were planted. Publishers, artists, and some characters. What made the list? What didn't? We're going to talk about all of it up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video below for links to my eBay store, my email, my whatnot, and my Instagram. So I've been doing this series, and this is episode number 3. We're doing this every Thursday, and the people who have watched it seem to have enjoyed it, because this kind of is, you know, a little bit of a forgotten part of comic book history. But we're looking at the comic books, and I'm kind of focusing only on comic books and comic book magazines, not pulps. Pulps have just recently started to be graded by CGC, and they are their own distinct thing. So we're not going to go into pulps or non-comic book magazines, except we will mention them as to where they fall in historical context, and if they have historical value, even if they're not necessarily comic book related. But we're going to see a lot of characters who became very popular throughout the 20th century, and some who are still popular today, and some who may not be so much as they were. So let's take a look. We're going to put the books right here, and we're going to start to talk about them. Now, we do have a 6-way tie for number 10 on the list. We're going to start with right here. There we go. More Fun Comics number 15 from DC Comics. And we can see very cartoony, you know, somebody playing football, and was that a mule's about to kick him? That is kind of interesting. Now, more fun, and you'll see this notation on the CGC slabs of this time, Dr. Occult Story. Dr. Occult was a character created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who does physically resemble Superman, and in many ways is considered the first superhero. He's the first DC character that is considered a superhero that still continues to this day. He was involved in the occult, kind of like an occult supernatural detective, and he's been used on and off again. And it was kind of a trial run by Siegel and Shuster to see what Superman would look like. And you can see Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster are listed in the credits of this particular book. Now, also tied here at 10th is More Fun Comics 11. Now, a lot of these like screen grabs that I've grabbed are from the Christine Farrell Complete DC Collection. She had, I guess, every DC comic book. I'm not sure up until what year, but if you know, this is complete. This is More Fun Comics 11, another Dr. Occult Story. Nothing else really special about it. All of these books tied at 10th have 14 copies on the census, and I'm talking about universal blue labels. We're not talking about restored, conserved, and very unlikely for books of this era signature series. So again, cartoony kid running out of school, all excited. Note that Dr. Occult Story is in here. More on Dr. Occult later. Also, tied at 10th, 14 copies on the census. New Comics number 6, another DC comic. Again, at this point in time, original material for a lot of these. Whitney Ellsworth, Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster art. Again, this cartoony kind of character. This was well before superheroes hit it off, and even the more popular kind of sci-fi mystery characters usually didn't make it to the covers just yet. Another book that has 14 copies on the census, and this is an interesting number 1 because we start to see some of the publishers that would define the golden age being put into place. And this is King Comics number 1 from David McKay Publishing. This is the first appearance. You can see him right there on the cover fighting a gorilla. First appearance of Popeye. Flash Gordon is in this. as well as Brooke Bradford. Henry. Henry's the kid with the clock in the lower left-hand corner. We see Olive Oyl down front and center. Mutt and Jeff. I think that's both of them in the background. Are they in this? Oh, no, maybe not. Mandrake's in this. Mandrake's a magician. And these characters are about to come into public domain. They mostly made their first appearances either in newspaper strips or radio serials. But this is the first comic book appearance of these characters. First comic book appearance of Popeye and Flash Gordon and Mandrake the Magician. That's a triple key. I don't know if people are still excited about Henry. Let's also tied is also with 14 copies on the census is Popular Comics number 2. This from Dell Publishing, a very early Dell book. And of course, Dell survived into the 1970s, publishing a lot of different titles. And we can see here this kind of who's Skipper and Skippy, Dick Tracy, Orphan Annie, and Don Winslow of the Navy. Don Winslow had his own Fawcett comic book for many issues in the 1940s, but he got his start a little bit earlier on. And also with 14 copies from Dell Comics is Popular Comics number 1. First comic book appearance of Dick Tracy. Dick Tracy made his debut in the newspaper strips. We also see Tailspin Tommy. Terry, I believe that's of Terry and the Pirates. Mutt and Jeff. Mutt and Jeff did have their own DC comic for a while. They were also newspaper characters. Gasoline Alley. Gasoline Alley ran forever. Might still be in the comic. I think there's still Gasoline Alley comics coming out today, comic strips. That was a staple. As a kid, it was in the Funnies, and I never understood the like as a kid, never really got it. But it was kind of interesting. Gasoline Alley, the characters did age in real time, which is unusual for comic characters. We can see Dick Tracy in the foreground here on the cover. And I'm not, well, I guess, I don't know who's who of the other characters on the cover, but there's a lot of characters in here. America's Favorite Funny. So we've had DC, and most of these are reprinting newspaper strips from Dell and King Comics. David McKay Publishing, which did King Comics number 1, they continued to about 1950. They did like King Comics and Ace Comics and Magic Comics, which were all basically newspaper strip reprints of very popular characters. So let's go. There are 2 books tied for number 8 on the list. And the first one is a magazine, Mickey Mouse Magazine, number 10, with this Donald Duck for President cover. You're seeing some very early Mickey Mouse at this point in time. Also, with 15 copies on the census tied for 8th, is Comics Magazine Funny Picture Stories. And this is the first appearance of The Clock, who appeared in the strip Alias The Clock. The Clock Begins. It's not his first appearance. His first appearance was in another book. But Clock stories begin in Funny Picture Stories from November. And that's the clock on the front cover, the guy with like the mask and the fedora and the tuxedo. Let's go to number 7 on the list. And this is a little bit different in terms of genre. This is from Comics Magazine, Detective Picture Stories, number 1. And this is the first comic book of a single theme. Detective Picture Story, it kind of took over from what the pulps did. Some of them had themes, related to weird, kind of science fiction-y stuff, or adventure tales, or detective stories. And this one is a detective story, The Phantom Killer, New Clock Mystery, Roadhouse Racket, Police Patrol, and others. So that is Detective Picture Stories number 1, 16 copies on the census. In 6th place, with 17 copies on the census, is Famous Funnies number 24. Again, we have this kind of comedic cover. Famous Funnies ran for a long time. The most in-demand issues of the run are the ones that Frank Frazetta did in the early 1950s, I believe it was. Some of them Flash Gordon stories. And he did some of those covers, which are very sought after. Tied for number 4 on the list is Mickey Mouse Magazine number 11. 19 copies of this on the census. And this is the first time that both Pluto and Mickey Mouse appear on the cover. One thing about Pluto that a lot of people don't know is, if I remember correctly, he was named after the planet Pluto, which is no longer classified as a planet, but was discovered back then, and they named Pluto the dog after him. But and you can see how kind of long ago this is, that Mickey Mouse still kind of has those little triangle wedges in his eyes. And also with 19 copies on the census, tied is Famous Funnies number 27. Now, this is interesting. The war on crime begins, right? So we're seeing war on crime, authentic stories of G-Men, and they use this picture cover, which is kind of interesting. We're seeing now with detective picture stories, and now with the crime stories, that genre being introduced into comic books. Number 3 on the list, with 20 Universal Blue Label copies from United Feature Syndicate, which still goes strong today, is Tip Top Comics number 1, which introduced a lot of their characters, including later on in the run Peanuts, which is a Universal Feature Syndicate. Again, Universal Feature Syndicate was a newspaper group that distributed comic strips to newspapers. We could see here over 100 funnies. I believe the way they define it, it's not 100 pages, but if you have like 4 comic strips in a page, you have, in 68 pages, you have well over 100 of them. And they have their lineup. In this issue, Tarzan, who you see there in the ring, I don't know who he's fighting. If you know in the comments, you can let me know. Lil Abner is also in this book. Lil Abner was a comic strip about a kind of some folks in the up in the mountains who were I don't know, a little simpler time. Didn't get into civilization much. It became a Broadway musical and a motion picture, and it ran for a long time. Fritzy Ritz is in this. She had her own title later on. And Danny Dingle. Alice in Wonderland, all in the family. Not like the TV show. Let's go to number 2 on the list. And number 2 is a Dell comic as well. This is The Funnies number 1. First appearances of Captain Easy, Alley-Oop, Mutt and Jeff, and Tommy Tailspin. Mutt and Jeff continued to have their own strip, their own comic book title for DC in the 1940s. And of course, Dell was a huge publisher that merged. I think they split off from Western in the late 1950s, merged with Gold Key. And especially in the 1960s, a lot of the movie-inspired and TV-inspired comics were Dell comics. And let's look at what the most slabbed comic book from CGC is for 1936. And it is More Fun Comics number 14. Oh, the first Dr. Occult in color and in costume. The previous More Fun Comics, I guess the interiors were in black and white. Here he has a costume. I'll put a picture of his costume here. That didn't last long. But we're still almost 2 years away from Superman. And look at the bottom tag there. All original, all new. These were not comic book reprints like we would see in some of the other strips. And that's kind of what set DC apart early on. But this is interesting. There are 25 Universal Blue Labels in the census. But the item with the most Universal Blue Labels on the census from 1936, it's not a comic book. It's not even a pulp. It is Time Magazine. The July 13th issue from 1936, which features a photo cover of a rookie for the New York Yankees by the name of Joe DiMaggio. Age 21, batting average .350, price $75,000. See Sport. And some of these, at this time, there was another one that did have, I think, like 18 copies on the census, which had, I think it was Lou Gehrig and Carl Hubble on the cover. Baseball collectors are going to collect baseball stuff, and this is kind of Joe DiMaggio's rookie magazine appearance, I guess. Let's take a look at some of the books that did not make the list. with 13 copies on the census is this Mickey Mouse Magazine number 5, which features the first Donald Duck solo cover. And this is old Donald. This does not look like the Donald Duck that you know. He's still not wearing pants, but this is a little bit different iteration. And this is magazine sized. And yeah, it's a Walt Disney book. So this is quite popular. There are 13 of these on the census, just making the top 10. With 12 copies on the census is More Fun Comics number 9, which is the first issue of this title after being New Fun Comics in a much larger, I think it was like 10 by 15 size, even larger than a Treasury edition. And More Fun Comics, of course, they do Dr. Occult is in this. And this gave birth to a lot of superheroes, a lot of them in the 1940s. Spectre, Dr. Fate, Aquaman, Green Arrow and Speedy, Superboy, Johnny Quick. And I think I'm missing somebody of some import. But yeah, it was just a breeding ground for comic books. It was one of DC's popular anthology titles. And there, as I think I said, there are 12 copies of this on the census. With 11 copies on the census is Comics Magazine number 1. This is another one of those newspaper reprints. Now, this is got an appearance of Dr. Mystic, who predates, I guess he predates Dr. Occult. It's close. Because the DC, yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the timing of all this, but this is by Siegel and Schuster. You also see that Shelley Mayer and Walt Kelly contribute to this book. There are 11 copies on the census. And one more book I'm going to mention as an honorable mention is, let me find it. Here it is. Popular Comics number 6 from Dell. This includes the first appearance of Scribbly. Scribbly was created by Sheldon Mayer. And eventually he took the Scribbly strip over to DC. Scribbly appeared in All American Comics number 1 and appeared in that book for years. And does have like a superhero connection that Ma Hunkel was one of the supporting characters in the Scribbly strip, and she eventually donned a costume of sorts and became the crime fighter, the Red Tornado, back in 1940, which gave birth to the Red Tornado character from the 1960s that was a member of the Justice League throughout the Bronze Age. And Ma Hunkel actually is a curator of the, I think, the JSA Museum in their brownstone in New York City. And she's the grandmother of the character Cyclone, who DC used as a character, one of the members of the Justice Society in the Black Adam movie. And there are just 8 copies of this on the census. So that is a pretty cool one. Moon Mullins, that's another one that ran forever in the newspapers. And they also advertised, they have the Stamp and Puzzle Pages, Magic, and others. So this was, the comics, there was a lot for kids at the time to dig through. And I like looking back at this kind of as a time machine back to this time. This is 2 years before Action Comics number 1. So we're seeing kind of the laying the groundwork of what comic books would look like. And the fact that what became DC Comics had set themselves apart by doing more original material than some of these other publishers who were taking the newspaper strips that they already had and putting them in comic book form. But, I mean, for a kid in 1936, there was no TV. You had radio. There were no video games. But comic books were a fairly inexpensive. I mean, we're still talking about Depression era. Fairly inexpensive form of entertainment for young kids at the time. And so those are the books that have survived to be graded by CGC as of the recording of this video. So these numbers do change, but there probably aren't a whole lot of these books left. And the ones, there might be more books of some other titles, but these are the ones that are a little more popular because they're number ones and first appearances, and they're worth more, and people are going to go out of their way to submit them. So I'd like to thank you all for stopping by in this video. If you enjoyed it, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.